There is a memory card sitting in a coffee tin on the top shelf of my garage, and the only thing on it that matters is 4 minutes and 11 seconds long. I have played that file somewhere close to 200 times. My wife has asked me twice to throw the card off the Fayette Station Bridge and let the New River carry it toward Gawley. Both times I drove down the switchbacks with the tin riding on the passenger seat, and both times I came back up the mountain with it still beside me. The file is labeled FCK 04172340, Fern Creek Knoll, April 17th, 11:40 at night. It came off a passive acoustic recorder that Emily Johnson strapped to a red oak about a quarter-mile east of the Endless Wall parking area, up where the rhododendron gets so thick that you have to turn your shoulders sideways and push through it like a swimmer. Emily was 38 that spring, and she was our resource specialist. Her project had nothing to do with what she found. She was running a bat survey, tracking the collapse of the northern long-eared population, and the units she deployed were tuned to catch echolocation calls far above the range of human hearing. The software drew them as little gray hooks and commas on a spectrogram. She looked at those pictures 10 hours a day, and she could read them the way a mechanic reads an engine by sound. She came into the office at Glen Jean on a Tuesday morning with her laptop already open, and turned around before she even said good morning to me. I had 11 seasons in the gorge by then. 11 seasons of hauling climbers off the bridge buttress with broken ankles, of pulling swimmers out of the Fayette Station Rapid, of standing in the rain at the Cunard Put-In explaining to a family from Ohio that the water was too high for the raft they had bought at a discount store. I knew the park in the way you know a house you grew up in. I knew that the sun leaves the bottom of the gorge 2 hours before it leaves the rim. I knew which culverts on Keeney Creek Road wash out first. I thought I knew what lived down there. Emily set the laptop on my desk and said, "Listen to this without looking at the screen." She had slowed the file down. That is the only reason any of it is audible at all. The unit had recorded a band we cannot normally hear, and she had dragged it down into human range, which stretches everything out and gives it a wet, dragging quality, like a voice speaking through syrup. The first thing on the file is water. Fern Creek runs down that hollow in a series of small falls, and the recorder sat close enough to catch it. Then at 11 seconds there is a knock. It is a single, flat, wooden crack. Anyone who has been in Appalachian woods knows that sound. A dead limb coming down and glancing off a trunk on the way. Nothing at all. At 19 seconds there is a second knock. It comes from a different bearing, and it is answered 11 seconds later by a third from somewhere farther up the slope. Then there is a stretch of 94 seconds where nothing happens except the creek. At 2 minutes and 51 seconds, something takes a breath. You can hear the intake. It is enormous. It is the sound of an air compressor filling, and it goes on for close to 3 full seconds, and then it comes out as a rising howl that climbs and holds and breaks apart into something that is almost, but not quite, a word. Emily watched my face the whole time. "That is not a coyote," she said. "Coyotes group howl and they yip on the way down. That is not an elk, because we do not have elk, and it is not a bear, because bears do not do that, and it is not a bobcat or a fox or a barred owl or a train brake or a kid with a speaker. I have run it against every reference library I have access to. There is no match." I asked her how far away the animal would have to be, and she said that based on the amplitude and the reverberation off the cliff line, it was standing somewhere between 40 and 80 feet from the microphone. 40 feet. That is the length of a school bus. That is nothing. I told her to leave the unit up, and I told her not to send the file anywhere yet. Michael Williams was our district ranger, 45 years old, 17 years in the service, a man who wore his uniform the way other men wear armor. Michael did not enjoy surprises, and he especially did not enjoy anything that might reach a newspaper. I wanted to hear it a second time before I carried it up his stairs. Instead of doing that, I did something I have thought about every day since. I put the file on my phone, and I drove down to Nuttleburg. Nuttleburg is a coal town that the mountain has been eating since 1958. You get there by taking Keeney Creek Road, which is a 1-lane gravel track with 16 switchbacks and no guardrail, and which drops you almost 1,300 feet down to the river through a green tunnel of hardwood. At the bottom there is a conveyor that runs straight up the mountainside for over 1,000 feet, and a tipple standing in the trees like the skeleton of a church, and a row of stone coke ovens with saplings growing out of the mouths of them. William Rodriguez was down there running a brush mower along the interpretive trail. He was 63, and he had been born at Winona, and his family had worked the Nuttall seam and then the Sewell seam, and then, when the seams gave out, they had worked at whatever the state of West Virginia could offer them. He volunteered 2 days a week for us, mostly so he could keep an eye on the place. He said the mountain got rude when nobody visited. I found him sitting on the tipple steps with a thermos, and I sat down next to him and told him I had a sound I could not identify. He said, "Play it." The creak came out of my phone speaker. The knocks came. He did not react. Then, at 2 minutes and 51 seconds, that huge wet intake of breath started, and William Rodriguez reached over without a word and turned my phone face down on the step, which cut the volume by half, and looked out at the river. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "My grandfather called that the Yeho." I asked him to spell it, and he laughed at me, and he said that nobody had ever spelled it, that it was not a word you wrote down, it was a word you said quietly in the truck on the way home. He said the old people at Sewell and Bury and Kaymore had known about them the whole time the coal was running. He said his grandfather had been a trapper boy at 11 years old, working a door underground for 10 hours in the black, and that the men used to say the Yeho came down to the tracks at night because the coal cars spilled corn and coal both, and it liked the corn. I told him I was not really in the mood for a ghost story. He said, "It is not a ghost story. A ghost story is about a dead man. This is about a live animal." Then he told me the 2 rules his grandfather had given him. The first rule was that you never look for it, because looking for it is a kind of invitation. The second rule was that if you ever smell something like a wet dog that has been rolled in a garbage can and then left in the sun, you should stop walking, put your back against a rock, and say out loud that you are leaving. Not in your head, out loud. He said they can hear a heartbeat, but they respond to a voice. I drove out of Nuttallburg that evening with my windows down because the air smells like moss and cold water down there, and I have always loved it. About halfway up the switchbacks, somewhere between turn 9 and turn 10, the truck filled with a stench so thick that my eyes watered and my throat closed, and I had to swallow twice to keep from being sick. It was not a dead animal. I have moved a lot of dead animals off park roads. Dead is sweet, and it is flat, and it sits low. This was hot and sour and alive, and it came in through the passenger window, and it went out again when I got around the next bend. I stopped the truck. I do not know why. I put it in park in the middle of a switchback on a 1-lane gravel road at dusk, and I sat there with the engine running and the smell fading out of the cab, and I listened. Something up the slope, above the road, moved once. It was a single step. It was heavy enough that I felt it in the floor of the truck the way you feel a door close in another room of your house. Then a rock about the size of a softball came down through the canopy and hit the gravel 4 feet in front of my bumper. And it did not roll, because it had not fallen. It had come in flat. Amanda Clark went missing 11 days later. She was 36. She lived in Charleston, and she was better in the woods than most of the people we search for. She photographed cliff lines for a small press that put out regional guidebooks, and she had a permit on file with us for that spring, which is how we knew where she was supposed to be. Her plan, filed by email, was 3 days on the endless wall rim shooting the sandstone from below at first light, camping legally at a site near Fern Creek, and coming out at the Nuttall lot on a Sunday. Her sister called us Monday afternoon. Her sister was Ashley Martinez, 47, who supervised a trail crew for the state over in Babcock, which meant she knew exactly how these calls go, and exactly how long we wait before we take one seriously. She did not waste any time being polite. She said, "My sister has never in her life missed a check-in, and I want boots in the Fern Creek drainage tonight." Jessica Garcia took the call. Jessica was 41, and she had been our lead dispatcher for 6 years, and she had the flattest, calmest voice I have ever heard on a radio. The kind of voice that keeps a panicking father from running into the river after his son. Jessica logged the call at 4:22 in the afternoon, and had the first hasty team moving by 6. Robert Wilson ran the search. He was 47, and he coordinated for the county. A heavy-set man with a gray beard, who had spent 20 years pulling people out of the gorge, and who had a way of talking to volunteers that made them work harder than they wanted to. He set up the command post in the Nuttall lot, ran his lines off the Endless Wall Trail, and put teams on Diamond Point, on Fern Buttress, and down the ladder into the boulder field. We found her car in the lot with a coating of oak pollen on the windshield thick enough to prove it had not moved in 4 days. We found her camp at 9 that night. This is where it started coming apart. The tent was standing, and it was zipped. Her sleeping bag was inside, unrolled, and there was a paperback face down on top of it. Her stove was set up on a flat rock with a pot of water still on it, and the water had a skin of pollen and needles on the surface. There was nothing torn, nothing scattered, nothing knocked over. It looked like a camp whose owner had walked 20 feet away to relieve herself and was about to walk back. Her boots were still in the vestibule. I want you to sit with that for a second. Her boots were in the vestibule of the tent, laces loose, the way you leave them when you take them off for the night. Whatever Amanda Clark did between 8 in the evening and morning, she did it in a pair of camp sandals or inner socks. Her camera bag was gone, and her tripod was gone, and later we understood why that mattered. Robert ran the search by the book, and the book is very good. We had 40 people the next day, and 70 the day after, plus 2 dog teams and a helicopter out of Summersville when the ceiling lifted. The dogs are the part one cannot let go of. A trailing dog is given a scent article, and it puts its nose down, and it goes. Both dogs took the scent off her sleeping bag without any trouble. Both dogs left the camp heading northeast, toward the rim, moving well, and both dogs stopped about 90 yards out at the base of a big tulip poplar. They did not lose the trail. Losing a trail looks like casting, circling, working back and forth. This was not that. Both dogs stopped at the same tree, sat down, and would not go forward. One of them, a Belgian shepherd that had worked 11 fines, laid its ears back and urinated where it stood, and its handler, a woman who had been doing this for a decade, told Robert flatly that her dog was done for the day. I was standing under that poplar when James Smith found the pack. James was 34, and he was our climbing ranger, which means he spent his working life on ropes on the Endless Wall, and he was in the habit of looking up. Everyone else was looking at the ground, because that is what you do on a search. James tilted his head back, and he said, in a completely ordinary voice, "Hey, is that hers?" Amanda Clark's camera bag was hanging in the poplar 14 feet off the ground. It was not caught. It was not thrown up there and snagged. The shoulder strap had been looped twice over a branch stub and pulled tight, the way you would hang a lantern on a hook. Her tripod was up there too, one leg jammed into the crotch of the branch above it. James went up on a ladder we borrowed from the maintenance shop and brought both down, and we bagged them, and the camera inside the bag was undamaged, and the memory card in the camera was full. Before I tell you what was on that card, let me say something to you directly, because you have stayed with me this far and I think you deserve to know where this is going. Everything in this account came out of an incident file, a dispatch log, and my own notebooks. I have changed almost nothing. If you want the rest of it, and there is a great deal more of it, then hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, so the algorithm quits burying these, and when you get to the end, tell me in the comments what you would have done at the tulip poplar, because I have never been sure I did the right thing. The card had 411 images. The last 60 of them were taken between 8:40 and 9:06 on the night she vanished, which we know because the camera stamps every frame. The first 53 are the cliff line at last light, and they are beautiful. Then the exposures change. She goes from a slow shutter on a tripod to a fast shutter with the flash forced on, which is what you do when you have stopped being an artist and started being a person trying to see something. Frame 399 is the rhododendron thicket, lit by the flash, nothing in it. Frame 402 is the same thicket from a slightly different angle, and there is a vertical shape in the back of it, out of focus, which could easily be a tree trunk. Frame 406 is that shape closer, and it is not a trunk, because trunks do not have a shoulder line. Frame 409 is the ground, blurred, taken while running. Frame 410 is the sky through the canopy. Frame 411 is a hand. Not a paw, not a hoof. A hand, out of focus, 3 feet from the lens, with the flash blowing it out to a pale gray, with coarse black hair down the back of it, and along the outside edge of the little finger, and with the palm turned toward the camera in a gesture that I have never been able to interpret as anything other than the universal signal to stop. Michael Williams looked at that image on a laptop in the command trailer at 2 in the morning, with 70 volunteers asleep in the parking lot outside, and he said, "That is a bear." I said, "Bears do not have thumbs." He said, "That is a person in a costume then, or it is a hoax, or it is her own hand, and I want you to understand something. We have a missing woman. If one word of this gets to a reporter, we will have 400 people with rifles and headlamps in this gorge by Friday, and Robert will lose control of a search area that is already 40 square miles of vertical rhododendron, and somebody will die out there who is not Amanda Clark." The worst part is that he was completely right. So we did what he ordered. We logged the images as unidentified. We kept the search running. And that night, on my way back to the truck, I stopped where the dogs had stopped, and I put my light on the base of that tulip poplar, and I found the print. The ground at the base of that poplar was seep wet from a spring that runs under the rocks there all year, and the print sat in it like a signature. It measured 16.5 inches from heel to toe, and 7¼ inches across the ball. I know that because I photographed it with a scale, and then I sat with it until first light so that nothing would step on it, and I did not sleep, and I did not smoke a cigarette even though I wanted one badly, because Robert had told me once that scent contamination ruins a scene faster than rain. Emily Johnson came out with dental stone at 6 in the morning. She had never poured a cast in her life. She read the instructions off her phone twice, mixed it in a plastic bag, and poured it slowly from about 4 inches up so that it would not blow out the detail. And then we sat and waited 40 minutes for it to set while the light came up green through the canopy and the wood thrushes started. While we waited, she talked, because she talks when she is frightened. She said the thing that bothered her was not the size. She said you can fake size. You can strap a plank to your boot and stomp around and make something 16 inches long. And people have been doing exactly that in this country since the 1950s, and half of the famous casts in existence are almost certainly that. She said the thing that bothered her was the brake. A human foot is a rigid lever. When you push off, your foot works as one piece, and it leaves a print with a clean arch and a defined heel and toe. A great ape foot is not rigid. It bends in the middle, at a place she called the mid-tarsal joint, and when it pushes off it leaves a pressure ridge across the middle of the print and a half moon of displaced soil behind the ball. The print at the poplar had that ridge, and the ridge was pressed deeper on the outside edge than the inside, which is what happens when weight rolls across a flexible foot on uneven ground. She said, "A person in a fake foot cannot make that. It is not that it is hard. It is that the plank does not bend." There was more. The toes were splayed, not aligned, and the second toe was set slightly forward of the big toe. Under a hand lens, the surface of the cast showed fine parallel lines across the ball of the foot, and Emily photographed those separately and did not say the word she was thinking about, which was ridges, the same kind of ridges that make a fingerprint. She said only that she wanted a better microscope than she had access to. The cast weighed about 9 pounds when we lifted it. She carried it back to the truck against her chest with both arms, the way you carry a child, and she put it in the back seat and buckled the seatbelt across it, and neither of us said anything about that. We found 7 more prints along a line running northeast toward the head of the drainage. Emily measured the distance between them. The stride was 52 inches, heel to heel, on level ground. Go outside and measure 52 inches. Then try to walk it without hurrying. I am 6 feet even, and my comfortable stride is about 30 inches. To make 52, I have to lunge, and I cannot do it twice in a row, and I certainly could not do it up a 20-degree slope while carrying anything. Whatever left those prints was not running. The depth was even, and the pressure was even. It was walking. We ran the search for 6 more days. On the fourth day, Michael Williams reduced us to a limited continuous operation, which is the polite phrase for the moment when everyone stops expecting to find a living person. Ashley Martinez stood at the edge of the command post while he explained it to her, and she did not cry, and she did not shout at him, which somehow was worse. She said, "So you are telling me my sister is going to be a folder?" Then she looked at me, because she had seen me at the Poplar with a camera and a scale, and she said, "What did you find in the mud?" I told her a track from an animal we had not identified. That was true, and it was cowardly, and I have never forgiven myself for the shape of it. That night James Smith and I went back in. We did it off the clock, which I want to be honest about because it was a violation of half a dozen things, and because I have watched other people get fired for less. We told Jessica Garcia where we were going, and she agreed to keep a radio open on a channel nobody monitors at night. And she made us promise a check-in every 30 minutes. She said, "If I miss 2 in a row, I am calling Robert, and then I am calling Michael, and then I am going to spend the rest of my career telling this story at trainings." That was Jessica. We parked at the Nuttall lot at 9:40 and walked in with red lights only. James carried a recorder, and I carried a rifle I was not authorized to carry. And I have never been more grateful for an unauthorized thing in my life. We set up on a bench of rock about 200 yards up from Amanda's campsite, with the cliff at our backs. The gorge at night is not quiet. There is always water. There are always the small sounds of mice and flying squirrels, and the periodic crash of something perfectly ordinary falling out of a tree. We sat for 2 hours and heard nothing that meant anything. And at 11:52, James did something I had asked him not to do. He picked up a length of hickory about the thickness of his wrist, and he hit the trunk of a beech tree with it, twice, hard. The sound went out across the hollow. It came back off the cliff line once. Then it stopped, and the gorge was as silent as I have ever heard it. 8 seconds later, something knocked back. It came from up the slope, maybe 300 yards, and it was 2 strikes, spaced the way James had spaced his. Then a second one answered it from the north, farther off, 3 strikes. Then a third from below us, between us and the river, between us and the truck, and that one was close. James put the stick down very slowly, as if putting it down gently would take back what he had done with it. They talked for 11 minutes. I do not have another word for it. The knocks moved. Whatever was below us went quiet, and then knocked from a position 200 feet to our west, which meant it had crossed a boulder field in under a minute without making a single sound that we could hear. In the night, in terrain where I would need both hands and a headlamp, and 10 minutes. Then everything stopped, and the smell came. It rolled up the slope with the cold air the way wood smoke rolls, and it was exactly what William Rodriguez had described to me on the tipple steps. Wet dog, garbage, something sour underneath it, ammonia sharp, the smell of a barn that has not been cleaned. My eyes ran. James started to gag and put his sleeve over his mouth. Nothing came out of the trees. Nothing charged us. There was one sound, a long, slow exhale, from somewhere inside the rhododendron about 40 feet away, at a height that I estimated then and still estimate now at somewhere near 8 feet, because I could hear where it was, and it was above the leaf line. I remembered the second rule. I stood up, and my legs were not entirely mine, and I said out loud, in a voice that came out much steadier than I expected, "We are leaving. We are going down the trail and we are leaving. We are not looking for you." I said it twice. The exhale came again, slower. We walked out. We did not run, because James said afterward that he had read somewhere that you never run from a thing that is built to chase. And I said afterward that I had not been thinking about anything except the sound of my own boots. It followed us for the first half mile. I do not mean that I felt followed. I mean that we could hear it, parallel to the trail, 30 or 40 yards off in the thicket, matching our pace, and that when we stopped, it stopped, with about a 1-second delay, the way a bad liar stops talking. At the edge of the parking lot it made a noise I have never been able to describe to anyone properly. It was not the howl from Emily's recording. It was lower, and it was shorter, and it went up at the end, and it sounded, I am sorry, it sounded like a question. Then we were in the truck, and the doors were locked, which was the most useless thing either of us has ever done. At the top of Fern Creek, On the way home, my headlights swept across something at the edge of the road that had not been there on the way in. 3 saplings, each about 15 feet tall, bent over and twisted together at the top into a rough arch, with a fourth laid across the crown of the arch horizontally. The bends were fresh. The bark was still green and split white in the fold. It stood directly over the trail, and you had to walk under it to go in. They found Amanda Clark on the 9th day, alive, 12 miles from where she disappeared. A river guide named Charlie found her. And Charlie is not on my list of people to talk about because he asked me once never to use his name in any report I filed, and I honored that. He was rigging a raft at the Cunard put in at 6 in the morning, and she came out of the tree line on the far side of the road, barefoot, in a fleece jacket and hiking pants, filthy, and she sat down on the gravel and asked him what day it was. 12 miles, through some of the worst terrain in the eastern United States, barefoot, in 9 days. The clinic in Oak Hill treated her for exposure, dehydration, and a hairline fracture of the left fibula that had partly begun to heal, which meant it was at least a week old, which meant she had been walking on a broken leg. Her feet were in a condition I am not going to describe in detail. Her body temperature was low. Her blood work was strange in ways the staff there could not account for, and which Michael Williams later had removed from the public file. She had lost 18 pounds. She would not let them cut her jacket off. She held onto it with both hands. When they finally got it off her and put it in a bag, the bag smelled so strongly that a nurse carried it out to a bench in the parking lot and left it there. Jessica Garcia and I interviewed her 4 days later, at her sister's house in Fayetteville, with Ashley Martinez sitting on the arm of the couch with her hand on Amanda's shoulder the entire time. We were told 20 minutes. We got about 50. Amanda remembered the first night with complete clarity. She said she had gone to bed and then woken because something was walking around her tent, and she had listened to it circle her 3 times, and she had known immediately that it was bipedal because of the rhythm. 2 beats, pause, 2 beats. She said a bear on 4 legs makes a rolling sound, and this was a walking sound. She said she got out because she could not stand lying there blind in a nylon bag, and she took her camera because it had the only bright light she had, and she took her tripod because it was the only thing she had that was heavy. She said the flash showed it standing in the rhododendron, and that it did not run. She said, and I am quoting my own notes here, it did not act like an animal that had been caught. It acted like a man who had been interrupted. She remembered running. She remembered falling into the creek. She remembered getting up and being turned around and running in the wrong direction, uphill, away from the trail. And she remembered a smell. And then, she said, the next 9 days were like a house with most of the lights off. What she had were pieces. She remembered lying under an overhang of rock with a shelf of leaves piled against her side. She remembered being thirsty and then not being thirsty, and she thought somebody had brought her water, and she could not explain how. She remembered eating something soft that she believed was rotted apple, and she thought about that constantly afterward, because the nearest apples in that gorge grow at the old homestead sites where the Cole families planted them 100 years ago, and they are hard little sour things in April, and there should not have been an apple. She remembered being moved. She was very clear about that. She said, I was not carried like luggage. I was carried against a chest, facing out. And she remembered 3 of them. She said, there were 3. There was one that was very big, and one that was smaller, and there was one that was small, and the small one came close. Ashley Martinez asked her, close how? Amanda said, close enough to smell my hair. She said it made a sound like a cat purring but slower, and she said, and this is the sentence that ended the interview, because Ashley stood up and asked us to leave. She said, I was not afraid of the small one. I think I was being kept for it. We stopped there. Michael Williams read our interview transcript and put his hands flat on his desk and looked at them for a long time. And then he said the only genuinely honest thing I ever heard him say. He said, I have a woman who walked 12 miles on a broken leg with no memory and no shoes, and lived. There is no version of that which does not require somebody to have helped her, and I do not want to know who. He put the file in a drawer. That should have been the end of it. It was the middle. 2 nights after that I drove down to Nuttleburg again, because there was one person left who was not going to lie to me. William Rodriguez was sitting in a lawn chair in front of the tipple with a cooler beside him, watching the light go off the far wall of the gorge. He did not seem surprised to see me. He handed me a can of soda and let me sit down, and then he asked me what it had done. I told him everything. The knocks, the arch of saplings, the smell, the word Amanda used, which was kept. He nodded through all of it, and then he told me about 1978. He said that in the fall of that year, when he was 15, 3 families still lived in the bottom near the old Nuttleberg store, even though the mine had been closed 20 years. He said that his uncle kept hogs, and one night in October, something came into the pen and took a shoat, a young hog of maybe 60 pounds, and carried it over a 4-foot fence without knocking the top rail loose. He said the men went out with lanterns and found it hanging in a sycamore by the river, 30 feet up, with the throat opened and nothing else eaten. He said his grandfather made them leave it there. He said. I asked him why, and he told me, because it is not ours, and because a thing that carries a hog 30 feet up a tree is telling you something, and the something is that it can carry a boy. Then William told me the part 1 did not want. He said the old people had a practice, and he did not like the word ritual, and neither do I, so let us call it a practice. He said that when the woods got rude, when the dogs would not go out, when the hogs went missing, the families would put something out at the edge of the tree line: corn, salt, a gutted deer in season. Never anything cooked, he said, because cooked food smells like people. I asked him whether it worked. He said, it worked in the sense that nothing else went missing. Then he leaned forward, and he told me the thing I have carried with me since. And I want to be careful about how I put it, because it is the hinge that the rest of this turns on. He said, listen to me. In all the years, all the stories, every account I ever heard from my grandfather, and from the men at Sewell, and from my own eyes, there is one rule those things follow. They do not come to us. They stay above the tracks, and they stay off the roads, and they let us have the bottom. The only time in 80 years that they came down was in 1952, and they came down because a man named Everett shot one out of a tree near Beery and left it lying. I asked him what happened after that. William Rodriguez looked at me and said, they came down for 11 nights, and they made a sound around that camp, every single one of them. And on the 12th night, Everett walked out of his own house at 2 in the morning in his union suit, and nobody ever found him. He put his hand on my arm. He said, so if they came all the way down to a woman in a tent, and they took her, and they kept her, and then they let her walk out at Cunard, then you had better find out what somebody did to them first. The calls started 3 days later, and Jessica Garcia logged every one of them, because Jessica logs everything, and because of that there is a record that is going to outlive all of us in a county filing cabinet. May 2nd, 11:50 at night. A caller on Gatewood Road reporting a large animal standing at the edge of her yard that she at first believed was a person on a ladder. May 3rd, 1:20 in the morning. A caller at the Cunard put in reporting that something was throwing rocks into the river from the bank above the parking area, and that he had been sitting in his truck for 40 minutes and was not getting out. May 4th, 2:40 in the morning. A caller in Winona reporting that her dog was gone off its chain. The chain was not broken. The clip was open. That dog weighed 90 pounds and was not a friendly animal, and it was never found. May 6th, 3 separate callers on Fayette Station Road within an hour, all describing the same thing, which was a howl. Emily Johnson had 11 recording units in the park by then, and she was no longer pretending they were about bats. She plotted the hits on a map, and the map told a simple story that made the back of my neck go cold when she showed it to me. The activity was not scattered. It was moving. It had started at the head of Fern Creek, and it was coming down, drainage by drainage, night by night, toward the river, toward the roads, toward the houses. William Rodriguez had told me they stay above the tracks. They were not staying above the tracks anymore. Ashley Martinez called my cell phone on the morning of May 7th at 6:50. I had never given her my number. She had gotten it from Robert Wilson, and she did not apologize for it, and she said 11 words to me. You need to come to Thurmond. My crew found something, now. Thurmond is a town of about 5 people at the bottom of the gorge. reachable by a one-lane bridge, with a railroad running straight through the middle of what used to be the main street. In 1910, there were 15 passenger trains a day, and 2 banks, and a hotel with the longest bar in the state. Now there is a depot the park restored, a row of empty storefronts with the front still standing, and a coaling tower up the tracks that looks like a cathedral built by people who worship something with no name. Her state crew had been clearing brush from the old Dunglen side, across the river, on a bench above the tracks. One of her people had gone up the slope looking for a place to relieve himself and had come back down without his hard hat, which he had dropped and not gone back for. She walked me up. It took 20 minutes, and we did not talk. There was a rock ledge with an undercut about 4 feet deep, and the mouth of the undercut had been packed with slate slabs and 2 sheets of rusted roofing tin, and the tin had been weighed down with rocks. It was not a natural formation. Somebody had built it. It took the 2 of us 11 minutes to open, and the smell came out at us before we had the second sheet clear. It was about 4.5 feet long, curled, lying on its side. It weighed, by the estimate Emily made later from the photographs and the ledge measurements, somewhere between 180 and 220 pounds. It was covered in hair that was a very deep reddish brown, almost black in the shade, and almost auburn where the light hit it. The hair on the back of the neck and the shoulders was longer, 5 or 6 inches. The hands were curled up against the chest. I want to be extremely careful here, because this is the part where people stop believing me, so I am going to stay with what I can defend. It had 5 fingers on each hand and 5 toes on each foot. The thumb was set lower on the wrist than a human thumb, and it did not fold all the way across the palm. The face had almost no muzzle. There was a heavy ridge above the eyes. The mouth was small, and the teeth I could see were flat and worn. The eyes were open and clouded, and they were, and I have thought about this word for years, they were brown. Around the left leg above the ankle there was a loop of aircraft cable pulled down to a diameter smaller than my wrist, and the cable had gone through the hair and through the skin, and the tissue underneath had swollen up over it and gone black. The free end of the cable had been cut with a bolt cutter about 18 inches from the loop. It was a snare, an illegal one, set with the spring lock reversed so it would not release, the kind that gets used on bear for the gallbladder trade and on nothing else. The anchor was still on a black locust 40 feet up the slope, with a length of cable still swaged to it, and a circle worn in the leaf litter about 11 feet across where something had gone around and around and around. Ashley Martinez stood there with her hands over her mouth, and then she sat down on a rock and said, "My sister said there were 3 of them." I said, "I know." She said, "There are 4. We worked out the timing later, and I still cannot look at it without feeling sick. Based on the state of it and the temperatures that spring, Emily put its death at somewhere between the 13th and the 16th of April. Emily Johnson recorded that howl at Fern Creek Knoll on April 17th. Amanda Clark went into her tent on April 28th. Whoever set that snare cut the cable, dragged a 200-pound body 100 yards downhill, walled it into a ledge with slate and tin, and drove home. I have my ideas about who. There was a man out of Leyland who had 2 prior wildlife convictions and who was seen twice on the Dunglen side that spring in a truck that did not belong there. And there was never enough to charge anybody with anything, and he moved to Kentucky in August. I have made my peace with that as much as a man can. I called Michael Williams from the bench above the tracks with no signal, and then from the depot parking lot with 1 bar, and I told him what was under the slate. And there was a silence on that phone long enough that I checked the screen twice. Then he said, "Do not touch it again. Do not photograph it again. I am coming down." He came down at 7 that evening with James Smith. We were going to secure the site overnight and figure out in the morning what a person is supposed to do with a thing like that, and I do not think any of the 3 of us had a single idea about what the right answer was. We sat in the depot. It has thick walls and a heavy door, and it was the only building down there with a lock. They came at 11:40. The first thing was the smell, coming in under the door and through the gap in the window frame, and by then it was practically a greeting. The second thing was a rock on the roof. Not a pebble. The tin of that roof boomed like a drum, and the sound went out over the river and came back. Then the knocks started, from 3 sides, and one of them was so close that we could hear the impact and the crack of the wood at the same instant, instead of one after the other. James stood with his back against the interior wall and his hands flat against it, which is what a climber does when he wants to feel something solid, and he said, quietly, "They are on the platform." Something walked the length of the depot platform. I heard 11 steps. The boards on that platform are 2-inch oak on 6-inch joists, and they do not move under a grown man, and they were flexing. Michael Williams did the thing that got him hurt, and I have never blamed him for it, because I understand exactly what was in him at that moment. He was a man who had spent 17 years being responsible for outcomes, and he had spent the past 3 weeks writing careful sentences in a file to make a thing not be true, and it was standing on the other side of a door. He opened it. He got it about 18 inches open and put his light out into the night and said, in the voice they teach us, "Federal officer," and a rock came in through that gap at a velocity I cannot describe and struck him on the left forearm and broke both bones in it. James pulled him back, and I put my shoulder into the door and got it shut. Then a voice came through the wood. I need you to understand that I am not saying it spoke. I am saying that something out there, at a range of about 6 feet, in a low register with the timing slightly wrong, said a word. And the word it said was Amanda. Not shouted, said. The way you say a name into a room when you are looking for the person. Michael Williams sat on the floor of the Thurman Depot holding his own arm, and he heard it, and James heard it, and I heard it, and none of the 3 of us has ever put that sentence into a document with our signature under it. It went on until 3:40 in the morning. Rocks on the roof at intervals, the platform boards. Once, a hand or something like a hand laid flat on the window glass for the length of a slow breath, and taken away. At 4 it stopped, all at once, the way it always stopped. Michael Williams was driven to the hospital in Oak Hill by James at first light with a broken arm and a written explanation involving a falling limb, and he did not correct it, and he retired that October at 25 years and moved to a house near Elkins. Before he left, he did one thing for me. He signed a work order authorizing the removal of a large animal carcass from federal land, with no species listed, and he handed it to me and said, "I do not want to hear about it, and I do not want it in a building, and whatever you are going to do, do it before somebody with a camera finds that ledge." We went up on the evening of May 9th. There were 4 of us. James Smith, Emily Johnson, William Rodriguez, and me. Ashley Martinez asked to come and I told her no, and she argued, and then she stopped arguing, and she stood in the Thurmond lot and watched us load and said, "Tell them she got home." I said I would. I do not know whether I did. We used a litter, the same kind we used to carry injured climbers out of the boulder field, and it took all 4 of us and 2 hours to move it half a mile, because the slope is what it is, and because we were not going to drag it. William had told us where. Not the ledge, not the road, the head of Fern Creek, up under the rim, at the place where 3 saplings had been bent into an arch over the trail. The arch was still there. It had gone yellow at the folds. We put the litter down under it, on a flat place, oriented so that it faced upslope. William had brought a 5-gallon bucket of shell corn and a block of stock salt, because that was what his grandfather had done, and he set them at the edge of the flat, and he did not explain himself, and nobody asked him to. Then he said, out loud, in a normal speaking voice, "We did not do this. We found him, and we brought him up. We are going now." We went about 200 yards down the trail, and we stopped in a place where the ground falls away, and you can see back up the drainage. And we turned off our lights, and we waited, because none of us could have walked away without knowing. It took 19 minutes. There was no sound before it. That is the detail I want you to sit with. 19 minutes of a spring night, peepers going in the seat below us, a whip-poor-will somewhere off toward the rim, and then, without any transition at all, the peepers stopped. The moon was 2 days off full, and the leaves were not fully out yet, and I could see the flat under the arch as a pale gray shape through the trunks, and something came into it from the upslope side. I am not going to give you an 8-foot monster. I am going to give you what I saw, which was worse, because it was so ordinary in its motion. It came in without hurrying. It was tall enough that when it stood beside the arch, the crossbar of that arch, which we had measured at 11 feet 9 inches, was at the level of its head. It was heavy through the chest and the shoulders in a way that no person is, and it moved with its arms hanging, and it had a way of turning its whole upper body to look instead of turning its neck. It stood over the litter for a long time. I counted and lost count. Then it crouched, and it made a sound. I will not try to spell it. It was low, and it was continuous, and it rose and fell, and it went on for close to 2 minutes, and it was the single most human noise I have ever heard come out of anything, and there was not one of us on that hillside who did not know exactly what it was, because every one of us had heard a version of it in a hospital corridor at some point in our lives. Emily Johnson put both hands over her face, and did not make a sound, and her shoulders went up and down. Then it lifted the body off the litter with both arms, against its chest, facing out, exactly the way Amanda Clark had described being carried, and it stood up with 200 pounds held that way as if it were nothing at all. Before it went up the slope, it turned and looked down the drainage at us. We were 200 yards away with no lights, downwind, behind a rock, and it looked directly at the four of us with no hesitation whatsoever. The way you look at a person you have known was standing there the entire time. And it raised one hand, palm out, flat, held. The same gesture that was in frame 411 on Amanda Clark's memory card, 3 feet from a camera flash on the night everything started. The gesture Michael Williams had called a bear, and the newspapers would have called a hoax. We had all read it as an attack. It is not an attack. I have had a long time to think about this, and I am as sure of it as I am of anything. It is what a person does at the edge of a road when there is a truck coming and somebody they do not know is about to step off the curb. It means stop. It went up the slope with the body and the leaves closed, and that was all. The corn was gone in the morning. The salt block was gone in October, worn down and finally taken. The activity stopped, not gradually. Emily's units recorded nothing anomalous after May 9th, none at all, through the end of that season and through the 2 after it. Jessica Garcia's log went quiet. The people on Gatewood Road slept. I would like to tell you that we all did well after that. Emily Johnson took a position in Oregon 8 months later, and she and I still talk twice a year, and she has never published a word about any of it, and I have never asked her whether she still has the cast, because I already know she does, and I do not want her to have to lie to me. James Smith is still on the wall. He does not go into the Fern Creek drainage. He does not make a thing of it. He just does not go. Michael Williams sent me a Christmas card the first 2 years with nothing written in it but his name. Robert Wilson retired from the county and teaches a class on search management, and he uses our search as a case study. And he has never once mentioned the dogs at the tulip poplar in that class, and I have sat in the back and watched him not mention it. Amanda Clark photographs cliff lines again. She sold a book. She does not camp. Her sister Ashley Martinez sends me a message every year on April 28th, and it always says the same 3 words, "Thank you still." William Rodriguez died in February of the following winter, in his own bed, 64 years old, and he is buried at Winona, up on the hill where you can hear the river when the leaves are down. I mowed the interpretive trail at Nuttleburg myself for 2 seasons after that, because he was right. The mountain gets rude when nobody visits. If you have made it this far with me, then do the small thing that keeps accounts like this one from disappearing. Subscribe, leave a like, and put a comment down below telling me what you would have done with what we found under that slate, because I still hear arguments about it in my own head at 2 in the morning. I have one more thing, and then I am finished. Last April, 7 years on, I walked up the Fern Creek drainage on my own time. I do not go often. I went because it was the anniversary and because I am the kind of man who marks things. The arch of saplings is still standing. Trees remember a bend. They grow into it and they carry it their whole lives. About 60 feet from it, in a stand of young beech, there is a second arch now. The saplings in it are thinner, and the bends are lower, and the crossbar sits at about 6 feet instead of 12, and the bark at the folds was still green and split white when I found it, which means it had been made that year. It is a smaller version of the same thing. It is the size a thing would build if it were learning how by copying something bigger. I stood there for a while, and then I said out loud that I was leaving, because that is the rule, and I went down the trail, and I have not been back. The memory card is still in the coffee tin on the top shelf of my garage. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I have not played it in over a year. But I know it is up there, and I know what is on it. And on the nights when the wind comes up the gorge and the house makes its noises, I lie there and I think about the fact that whatever made that sound is still walking around out there under the rim, above the tracks, keeping to its side of an agreement that nobody ever wrote down. And I think about the smaller arch. And I think about how patient a thing has to be to teach a child something you have to build with your hands. There is a rule about sound in the New River Gorge, and every person who works the rim learns it in their first season, usually the hard way. The rule is this: never trust a voice that comes up from below. The gorge is roughly 1,000 feet deep in places, walled in sandstone, filled from lip to water with hemlock and oak and rhododendron so thick you can lose a grown adult at 12 feet. Sound does not travel through that country the way it travels anywhere else. It hits the cliff bands and it folds. A shout from the river can arrive at Diamond Point sounding like a whisper at your shoulder. A truck door closing in Fayetteville can reach the endless wall as a rifle shot. Two people talking on the Kmore stairs can sound, from the rim, like a crowd of 40. New people hear a voice. They walk toward it, and the gorge takes them somewhere they did not intend to go. So we teach the rule. Fix the sound with the map, not with your feet. Confirm with the radio. Do not go toward a voice. I have been enforcing that rule since I was 26 years old. 18 seasons in this park, most of them on the North Rim, running trail patrol, incident response, and the search and rescue rotation. I know the flood marks on the piers under the bridge. I know which sections of the old rail grade wash out and which do not. I know the sound of a peregrine over Beauty Mountain, and I know what a black bear does to a bear canister that was not locked properly. None of that helped me in the last week of October 2 years ago. I want to be careful here, because I have told parts of this to exactly 4 people, and 2 of them have stopped returning my calls. What follows is assembled from my patrol log, from my own memory, and from a set of recovered files I should have surrendered and did not. The first entry that matters is dated October 22nd, 14:31 in the afternoon. My log says, in my own handwriting, 3 words: Knox near Fern. Here is what those 3 words hide. I was working the trail above Fern Creek, checking a section of boardwalk that had rotted through at the joists. Cold day, low ceiling, the kind of overcast that makes the sandstone look wet even when it is not. Leaf drop was almost finished. When the leaves come off in that country, you get your one window a year, where you can actually see through the forest, down the slope, layer past layer, all the way to the talus. I was on my knees with a pry bar when the first knock came. It was a single hard strike, wood on wood, from downslope. The distance was hard to place, which is normal here. I registered it and I kept working, because there are 20 ordinary explanations. A limb dropping, a hiker with a trekking pole, a pileated woodpecker, which can produce a sound very close to a hammer blow. The second knock came about 8 seconds later, from a different bearing, farther east and higher. Then the third, from the west, low. I stopped working then, not out of fear, out of arithmetic. 3 strikes, 3 separate positions, spaced with the kind of interval you get from something that is waiting for a reply. I stood up on that half-repaired boardwalk with a pry bar in my hand, and I listened to a forest that had gone completely silent underneath the knocking. No jays, no squirrels working the leaf litter, nothing. I keyed my radio and asked dispatch if there were any work crews or permitted groups below the Fern Creek section. Dispatch came back negative. Nothing scheduled, nothing checked in. I logged 3 words and I went back to the boardwalk. And I would like to tell you that I did that because I was calm. The truth is that I did it because I had already decided what I was going to believe. And I had made that decision years before, sitting in a break room listening to a man named William Rodriguez explain that there were parts of this gorge he would not walk after 4 in the afternoon. William Rodriguez was 63 that autumn. He had worked the gorge in one capacity or another since he was 19, first for the railroad, then for the state, then for us as a seasonal on-trail crew, and finally as the man everybody called when something needed to be found. He had a memory for terrain that I have never seen matched. He could sketch you the bench cuts at Nuttleberg from the year they were abandoned. He had located 4 bodies in his career, and he did not talk about any of them. He also did not walk the Craig Branch drainage after 4 in the afternoon. And when a younger employee asked him why, he said only that the drainage did not want him there. And then he changed the subject so completely that the question died. I had heard him say it in the break room in my 2nd season. I had laughed about it in my 3rd. By my 10th I had stopped laughing, and by my 18th I had my own list of places, though I did not say the list out loud. Fern Creek was not on my list yet. It went on the list that afternoon. The knocking did not repeat. I finished the joist work at 16:10 and hiked out. On the way to the trailhead I passed a hemlock about 30 inches through at the base, and about 7 feet up the trunk the bark had been raked off in 4 parallel grooves. Bear claw marks run in a set that a person learns to recognize. They are usually lower. They usually show at a slight angle, and the spacing corresponds to a paw you could cover with your hand. These grooves were spread wider than my open hand. They were deeper at the top of the stroke than at the bottom, which is the wrong direction, and there was no bark litter at the base of the tree. I photographed them. I did not put them in the log. That is my confession, and it is the first of several. I have gone over it many times since. If I had entered a description of that hemlock into the record on October 22nd, there would have been a paper trail. There would have been a reason to question the search plan a week later. There would have been something for the review board to look at other than my face. Instead, I drove home to Fayetteville, ate a late dinner, and slept without difficulty. At 6:40 the following morning, a group of 8 people signed the register at the Endless Wall trailhead. None of them signed out. The report came in on October 24th at 1952, which was already too late, and everything that happened afterward was shaped by that delay. The group had been organized through an outdoor club out of Charleston. 8 adults, mixed experience, planning what should have been an easy 2-day loop with 1 night out at a permitted site. Their vehicles were in the Fayette Station lot. Their names were on the register in blue ink, in the same handwriting, filled out by whoever had been holding the pen. James Smith, 34, Emily Johnson, 38, Michael Williams, 45, Jessica Garcia, 41, Robert Wilson, 47, Amanda Clark, 36, William Rodriguez, 63, Ashley Martinez, 47. I stood in the lot with a flashlight and read that register 3 times because the 7th name did not belong on a recreational club roster. William Rodriguez had retired from seasonal work 4 years earlier. He had not, to my knowledge, hiked with an organized group in his life. He hated groups. He said groups made noise, and noise made you deaf in a place where hearing was the only sense worth trusting. I called the club coordinator from the lot. She told me that Rodriguez had contacted them, not the other way around, 11 days before the trip. He had offered to come along as an unpaid guide. He had specifically asked which route they intended to take. When they told him, he had asked them to change it. They had not changed it. The route as filed took them along the rim to Diamond Point, down through the boulder field, and then east along the old bench toward the Kaymore sections, with a night at a permitted site above Craig Branch. Craig Branch, after 4 in the afternoon. I want you to understand what a search looks like in the New River Gorge, because television has taught people something that is not true. There is no line of volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder. You cannot walk shoulder to shoulder in there. The rhododendron alone will stop a person cold. Locals call the worst of it Laurel Hell, and the name is accurate. It grows in interlocking mats, waist to head high, on slopes of 30 and 40 degrees, over talus that shifts under your boots. 100 feet of that country can take 20 minutes and leave you bleeding. So a search here is trails, drainages, benches, and rock. You work the corridors people are actually able to move through, and you accept that everything in between is functionally sealed. Incident Command stood up at 2200. By 06 the following morning we had 11 personnel, 2 county teams inbound, a canine unit, and an air asset promised for later in the day if the ceiling lifted, which it did not. I was assigned the eastern bench with 2 county searchers. We started at first light, which in the gorge in late October means about 7:40, since the walls hold the night in long after the sky has gone gray. We found the first item at 08:15. It was a trekking pole, aluminum, collapsed to its shortest setting, standing upright in the leaf litter about 4 feet off the bench trail. Standing upright, not fallen, not leaning, driven point down into the ground hard enough to stand without support, in soil that was frozen an inch deep. One of the county searchers, a young man who had been on maybe 6 of these, said that somebody must have left it as a marker. I told him to photograph it and flag it and not to touch it, and I made a note of the coordinates, and I did not say what I was thinking, which was that I had seen a great deal of gear abandoned in this park over 18 seasons, and none of it had ever been planted. We found the camp at 0941. The permitted site sits on a small flat above Craig Branch, ringed by hemlock, with a fire ring that has been there longer than the park has. 4 tents were standing. A 5th was down, poles snapped at the ferrules, fabric pulled about 11 feet from where it had been pitched, still staked at one corner so the ground was scored in a long arc where it had dragged. Everything else was intact. That is the part one needs you to hold on to. Food bags still hanging on the line, untouched, which rules out the bear that everybody wanted it to be. Boots outside tent doors, a phone in a jacket pocket at 31% battery, water filters, stove, a paperback lying open and face down beside a sleeping pad, spine cracked at page 140. 8 people had walked away from a camp in the middle of the night in stocking feet, leaving their boots behind. Michael Williams was our incident commander that morning, 45 years old, 12 years of command experience. A man who did not raise his voice and did not speculate. He came up the bench at 11:20, walked the site once without saying anything, and then stood at the edge of the flat looking downslope into the laurel for a long time. Then he asked me a question I have thought about every week since. He asked me whether I had ever known Rodriguez to be wrong about a drainage. I told him no. He nodded, and he said that we were going to work this by the book, and that if anybody heard anything unusual they were to report it on the radio using plain language and no interpretation. That instruction seemed unremarkable at the time. Standard discipline. Do not editorialize on an open channel. By that evening I understood that Michael Williams had already heard something himself. The last thing we documented at the camp, before the light failed, was on the far side of the fire ring, in the soft ground where the seep comes down off the slope. There were prints, not a full trackway, 2 clean impressions and part of a third, in a stride that I measured at 52 inches heel to heel. The clearest one was 17.5 inches long and just over 7 inches at the ball. 5 toes, splayed, with the big toe offset in a way that no boot manufacturer produces and no bear anatomy allows. Bears have 5 toes as well, and their hind track can fool a person, but a bear track shows claw marks ahead of the toe pads and a distinct heel pad shape, and this had neither. The midfoot showed a pressure ridge, a raised band of soil pushed up in the middle of the print, which happens when a foot flexes across the arch under weight rather than landing rigid. I have seen a great many hoax tracks. People do this for entertainment. Hoax tracks are pressed, uniform in depth, and they do not flex. Amanda Clark was 36 and worked as a wildlife technician on a bat survey contract, and she happened to be the only person on that hillside with casting material in her pack. She poured 2 of the 3 prints while I held a light for her. Her hands were steady, her voice was not. She asked me what I wanted her to write on the label. I told her to write the coordinates, the date, and the words unidentified track. She wrote it. And then she looked at me and asked whether I wanted her to write what she actually thought. I told her no. If you are still with me at this point, do me one favor before we go down into the gorge together, because the rest of this gets harder to tell. Tap the like button on this recording, and leave me a comment telling me what you would have written on that label. Subscribe if you want the rest of the file when I post it. I am telling this here because there is no other place left where it will be heard, and every one of you who stays through to the end makes it a little more likely that somebody eventually looks at Craig Branch the way it deserves to be looked at. Jessica Garcia was 41 years old and had been running search canines for 9 of them, and her dog was a Belgian Malinois named Ovid who had located 2 living subjects and 1 deceased in the previous 18 months. She arrived at the Craig Branch camp at 1300 on October 25th, with scent articles pulled from the vehicles in the Fayette station lot. Ovid took the article. He worked the flat correctly, quartering, nose high, the way an air scent dog does when conditions are damp and the scent is pooling. He hit on the collapsed tent, worked it, and then he moved to the downhill edge of the flat where the ground drops toward the laurel. He stopped there. He did not indicate. He did not cast for a better line. He stood at the edge of that flat, with his weight shifted back over his hind legs, and he made a sound I have never heard from a working dog. It was not a growl, and it was not a whine. It was continuous, low, and it came out of him in the same rhythm as his breathing, as though he could not stop it. Then he backed up, not turned, backed, keeping his head pointed downslope, until his hindquarters were against Jessica Garcia's legs. She worked him for another 40 minutes. She reset him 3 times from 3 different approaches. Each time he came to the same invisible line at the edge of that flat, and each time he stopped and backed off it. At 14:10 she called it and told Incident Command that her dog was non-functional at this location and that she would not force him. I have watched Jessica Garcia send that dog into a collapsed structure. I watched her walk him off Craig Branch that afternoon, with her jaw set so hard I could see the muscle standing out under her ear. The county team brought a second canine up at 16:30. Different handler, different breed, a bloodhound working trailing rather than air scent. Same result, same line. The hound sat down and would not rise, and when the handler pulled the lead the animal urinated where it sat. By that point we had 19 searchers in the gorge and a weather system moving in from the southwest. Ashley Martinez was 47 and worked as a communications and data specialist on temporary assignment to the park, which is a long title for the person who keeps the repeaters running and the files organized. She had set up a small operations tent at the Fayette station lot, and she was managing the radio log and the camera trap data, because Amanda Clark had remembered something important at about the same hour. The BAT survey contract had cameras out. 9 motion-triggered units, mounted along the eastern bench and the Craig Branch drainage, deployed in September for a study on roost site activity. 2 of those units sat within 400 meters of the permitted camp. Michael Williams authorized the recovery at 1700, and because the light was already failing, he sent 4 of us together and told us to be back at the vehicles by 1930. We were not back by 1930. Robert Wilson was 47 and ran trail crew, which meant he had spent more hours on that bench than anybody else on the search except Rodriguez, and he was the one who noticed the trees. We were maybe 200 meters east of the camp, moving along the bench in headlamps, when he stopped and put his light up into the canopy. The saplings on the uphill side of the trail had been broken. Not cut, not wind thrown. Broken at a height of about 8 feet, and bent over, so that the tops came down and crossed, in a line running perhaps 60 feet along the slope. Where the tops crossed, they had been twisted together, not tied. There was no cordage. The fibers themselves were wound around each other in a spiral, the way you would wring water out of a cloth. Robert Wilson had 13 years on that trail crew. He knew every ice storm and every microburst that had come through that drainage. He looked at that line of woven saplings for a long moment, and then he said, quietly, that he had cleared this exact section in June. Amanda Clark asked what he meant by cleared. He said he meant that in June this section had been open, and that whatever we were looking at had been made since the leaves came off, because there was no dead foliage on any of the broken tops. Greenwood, recent. We recovered the first camera at 1840. The second unit, the one nearest the camp, was on a hemlock at a bearing that put it looking directly across the drainage. The camera was not on the tree. The mounting strap was still there, cinched, undamaged, the buckle still locked. The camera had been removed from inside a closed strap, which is possible only by working the body out through a loop that was tighter than the body itself, or by pulling hard enough to deform the housing. We found it 11 meters upslope, wedged into a crack in the sandstone, lens outward, facing the trail, facing the place where we had been standing. I am not going to tell you that a machine was aimed at us on purpose. I am going to tell you exactly what we found, and let you sit with it the way I have had to. The housing was cracked along the seam. The lens was intact. The SD card was still seated. We got back to the vehicles at 21:10, 90 minutes overdue, and Michael Williams did not say a word about it. He took the cameras and he handed them to Ashley Martinez, and he told her to pull everything and to do it alone in the operations tent with the flap closed. Then he walked away from the lot and stood by himself at the edge of the pavement, looking down into the gorge for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I stood inside the tent watching him through the mesh, and I could not make myself go out there. Ashley Martinez came to find me at 23:40 on October 25th. The rest of the operation had gone to rest cycle. The tent had a heater running, and the two of us sat in front of a laptop with the flap zipped. She had 3 files she wanted me to see. The first was from Unit 6, the one still on its tree, time-stamped October 23rd at 22:17. Infrared, black and white, the flat gray wash you get from those units at night. The frame showed a section of bench trail, 9 seconds of nothing. Then, at the far edge of the illumination, a shape crossed left to right. It was too far out for the infrared to properly reach it, so what you saw was mostly the absence of trees behind it. A vertical mass moving through the frame, and I want to be precise about this because precision is all I have. It did not swing its arms in the arc a person swings them. Its stride was long, and the upper body did not counter-rotate. The head did not appear to sit above the shoulders the way ours does. It appeared to sit forward of them. Estimated height, based on the known height of the camera mount and the known trail width in that frame, was between 7 feet 6 inches and 8 feet 2 inches. It crossed the frame in 4 steps. The second file was Unit 9, the one we found in the rock crack, time-stamped October 24th at 03:51, which places it roughly at the hour the camp emptied. That file is 31 seconds long. For the first 22 seconds, the frame is empty trail. At 23 seconds, a face enters from the bottom of the frame. It fills the lens. It is out of focus because the unit cannot focus that close. What resolves is a brow ridge, heavy and continuous, and beneath it an eye, and the eye is open and reflecting the infrared as a flat disk of light the way a deer eye does at the edge of your headlights. Around the eye there is hair, and the hair runs down and across the cheek in a direction that follows the bone. It holds there for 6 seconds. Then, at 29 seconds, the frame jerks, and the last 2 seconds are motion blur and rock. That is the moment the camera came off the tree. Something worked a device out of a cinched strap while looking into the lens. Ashley Martinez played it 4 times. On the 4th pass, she stopped it on the still frame, and neither of us said anything for a while. And then she asked me a question in a very level voice. She asked whether I thought it knew what a camera was. I told her that I did not know. She said that she had worked with wildlife imagery for 11 years, and that animals investigate cameras constantly. Bears chew them, deer sniff them, raccoons pull them down. She said that what animals do not do is remove a device and then place it, undamaged in the lens, pointed at the trail. The third file was audio. Unit 4 carried a microphone, which the BAT survey used for echolocation recording at frequencies far above human hearing. It also captured everything below that. The file was from October 24th at 04:11. It opens with the drainage. Water over rock, wind in the hemlock. At the 11-second mark, a woman's voice says a name. The name is Michael. She says it twice, and there is nothing frightened in it. It is conversational, the way you would say a name across a room. The vowel is drawn out slightly on the second repetition. Then there is silence for 9 seconds. Then the same voice says the same name again, and this time the pitch is wrong. It is lower by an interval I could hear but could not measure, and the second syllable falls off into a sound that is not language and is not a human throat. It descends. It keeps descending past where a voice should stop, into something with a rattle in it. Then, from a different direction, farther out, another voice says the same name in the same way. Then a third. Ashley Martinez had already isolated the channels. There were 4 distinct sources on that recording, separated in space, and every one of them was saying Michael, and none of them was Michael Williams, because Michael Williams was in Charleston on October 24th at 0411 and did not arrive at the incident until 19 hours later. I asked her the obvious thing, whether one of the 8 had been calling for help and the drainage was doing what the drainage does, folding the sound off the cliff bands and returning it from 4 bearings. She had already tested it. She showed me the waveform side by side. An echo carries the source. It is attenuated, it is smeared, but the fingerprint of the original is in it. These were 4 separate productions of the same word. Different fundamental frequencies, different durations. One of them started before the previous one had finished. She closed the laptop, and she said that she was going to make copies before she turned anything over, and I told her that I had not heard her say that. Then I went out and stood in the cold, and I understood, finally and completely, why a man with 40 years in this gorge had telephoned a hiking club out of Charleston and asked 8 strangers to change their route. He had not gone with them as a guide. He had gone with them because they would not listen, and he could not let them go in there alone. We found the first of them on October 26th at 11:52. Emily Johnson, 38, was 340 meters from the camp, in the laurel on the downhill side of the bench, and she was alive. She had a fractured wrist, a core temperature of 93.1, and lacerations across both forearms consistent with moving through rhododendron at speed. She had no boots. Her feet were beyond description, and I will not describe them. She was conscious. She could tell us her name and the date, though she gave the date as the 23rd. When the medic asked her what had happened, she said that they had all gotten up because Michael was calling. The medic asked who Michael was. She said she did not know. She said none of them knew anybody named Michael. She said that was the reason they all came out of the tents, because they heard a woman outside calling for somebody who was not there, and Rodriguez had been shouting at them from the fire ring to stay inside and to stop answering. She said that Rodriguez had gotten between them and the edge of the flat. She said that after that she was in the laurel, and it was very loud, and she did not remember choosing to run. She was flown out at 13:20, when the ceiling finally lifted for 90 minutes. We found James Smith at 15:10, 600 meters downslope, deceased. The manner was consistent with a fall through the talus. I was not the one who found him, and I have never asked for the photographs. We found Amanda Clark's casting kit at 16:40, which is when the search became something else, because Amanda Clark was supposed to be at the vehicles. She had gone back up. She told me later that she went back for the 3rd print, the partial one, because the weather was coming and she knew it would be gone by morning. She told me this in a hospital corridor in Beckley with her arm in a sling, and she did not apologize for it, and I did not ask her to. What she found instead was the bench above Kmore. The old mining works run along the gorge wall east of the camp, benches cut into the slope over a century ago, with the ruins of a conveyor and a head house, and below it 821 steps that drop toward the river. The forest has taken most of it. There are places where you can walk on a level grade for 200 yards and never realize you are standing on something that was built. At 1750, she came onto that grade and found the arrangement. 9 hemlock saplings, cut or broken at the base, driven upright into the ground in a rough arc perhaps 20 feet across, and between them, woven horizontally, the tops of living rhododendron that had been pulled in from either side and wound together the same way as the trees on the bench. Inside the arc there was a depression in the leaf litter approximately 9 feet long, and there were objects. A boot, a stuff sack, a section of aluminum tent pole bent into a curve, a radio, ours, from the search, which had been reported lost by a county searcher 4 hours earlier, in a location 600 meters away. She photographed it. She got 11 frames. Then, according to what she told me, and what she told the review board, and what she has never once changed, the sound started from 3 sides at once. Not the voices. She said the voices came later, and she would not describe them. The first sound was the knocking, wood on wood, hard, from the west, and then answered from the east, and then a third from directly above her on the slope, close enough that she felt the impact through the ground. She ran east because west was where the first knock had come from. She fell twice on the bench grade. The second fall separated her shoulder and put her against the base of the headhouse foundation, and she said that she lay there with her face in the leaves and listened to something walk past her at a distance she estimated at 30 feet, moving on two legs, not hurrying. She said the smell arrived after it had passed, and that it was wet and sour and organic, and that she has not been able to eat pork since. And she said that when it was directly downhill of her, it stopped, and it said her name, Amanda, in Robert Wilson's voice. Robert Wilson was at that moment on the eastern bench with two county searchers, 400 meters away, and had not spoken above a conversational level in 20 minutes. We got to her at 1922 on a hasty team of 6 with every light we had. The arrangement was where she said it was. The objects were where she said they were. I stood inside that arc of woven saplings with a light in my hand, and I did the only thing my training had left me, which was to record. 9 uprights, diameters between 2 and 4 inches, all broken, not cut, all broken at a height between 11 and 14 inches, all snapped with the fibers pulled rather than sheared. I have broken a 2-inch hemlock over my knee. It is work. 9 of them, driven upright into frozen ground. We recovered the radio. We recovered the boot, which was later matched to Jessica Garcia, who had lost it while withdrawing her canine 41 hours earlier from a location that was not this one. And in the leaf litter at the northern edge of the arc, under a rhododendron, I found a folded piece of paper in a plastic sandwich bag. It was a page torn from a field notebook. The handwriting was small, square, and absolutely familiar to me, because I had watched that hand-sketch bench cuts on a break room table for 18 seasons. It said, "And I am reading this to you from a photograph I should not have. I told them to keep the fire small. They did not. It has come in 3 nights running, and tonight it is closer. It is not hunting us, it is moving us. It puts the sound where it wants us to walk, and we walk there. Do not follow the voices. If you are reading this, you are already inside the line it drew. Go up, not down. Up and east, and do not stop at the grade." There was one more line, written after, in a different pressure, as though the pen had been held differently. It is very old, and it is not alone. The official record of that incident runs to 260 pages, and it is a good faith document. I want to say that plainly, because I know how this sounds by now. Of the 8 who signed the register on October 23rd, 3 were recovered alive. Emily Johnson, 38, Ashley Martinez, 47, who was found on the 27th, 2 miles east of the camp with no memory of how she covered that ground, and Jessica Garcia, 41, who walked out under her own power on the 28th, carrying her dog's collar and not her dog. 2 were recovered deceased, James Smith, 34, Robert Wilson, 47, who was on the eastern bench with 2 county searchers at 1750 on October 26th, and who was found on November 2nd at the base of a cliff band that he had no operational reason to be near. 3 were never recovered. Michael Williams, 45, who left the operations tent at 0240 on October 27th and did not return, and whose radio was found still keyed open on the bench grade. Jessica Garcia is alive, so let me correct myself and be accurate, because accuracy is the last discipline I have. The 3 never recovered are Michael Williams, 45, Amanda Clark, 36, who was airlifted from the head house on the night of the 26th, discharged from Beckley on November 4th, and who walked out of her sister's house in Oak Hill on the 14th and has not been seen since, and William Rodriguez, 63. The formal finding was environmental exposure with contributing factors of route deviation and adverse weather. It cites the collapsed tent as wind damage. It cites the tracks as inconclusive and possibly ursine. It cites the audio as acoustic reflection consistent with known gorge topography, which is a sentence written by a person who has never sat in a tent at midnight and watched 4 waveforms overlap. The camera files were entered into evidence and are not publicly available. Ashley Martinez made copies, Ashley Martinez was reassigned in January. The page from Rodriguez's field notebook is not in the record. It is in a fire safe in my house, and there is a photograph of it on a drive that does not connect to anything. I still work here. That surprises people when I tell them, and my answer is not the noble one they expect. I do not stay to protect anybody. I stay because I know where the line is now, and because a person who does not know where the line is might be assigned this district next. I have made changes. I do not work the Eastern Bench alone after 1500. I do not take Craig Branch at all. When I brief seasonals in the spring, I teach them the rule about sound, the same one I was taught, and then I teach them a second one that is not in any manual. If you hear your own name in this gorge, and the person who said it is not standing where you can see them, you do not answer, you do not investigate, and you do not go quiet either. You keep talking. You keep making your own noise, in your own voice, and you walk up and east and you do not stop at the grade. I do not know what it is. I have read everything and none of it satisfies me. The word people want me to say has been said so many times by so many hoaxers that it has been worn down to nothing, and using it would tell you less than what I have already told you. A creature that stands over 7 feet, that breaks hemlock at the base and weaves rhododendron, that removes a camera from a cinched strap and sets it facing the trail, that copies a human voice well enough to move 8 adults out of their tents in stocking feet at 4 in the morning, and knows to use a name that none of them recognized, because a name you do not know makes you come out to look. That last part is what I cannot get past. Fear is manageable. What is not manageable is design. 2 months ago, I was closing a gate on the North Rim at dusk, in November, in weather, and from somewhere below me in the leafless timber I heard a woman say a name. It was not Michael. It was mine. I got in the truck, I turned the engine over and I drove out, and I did not look at the mirror, and I have not been back to that gate after 4 in the afternoon since, which puts me exactly where William Rodriguez was when I was young enough to laugh at him in a break room. He was right about the drainage. He was right about the 4 o'clock. He was right that it does not hunt so much as it herds, and that the sound is the tool it herds with, and that by the time you understand you are being moved, you are already inside the line it drew. So here is the only thing I have that is worth anything to you. If you ever stand on that rim, and the gorge speaks to you in a voice you know, understand that the voice is not an invitation, and it is not a mistake, and it is not an echo. It is a hand on your back, and it is patient, and it is very old, and it is not alone. There is a filing cabinet in the back of the maintenance shed above Fayette Station Road, and the 3rd drawer from the top has never carried a label. Everything else in that shed is labeled. There are bins marked for trail signage and bins marked for culvert hardware. There is a coffee can with the word fuses written on masking tape in handwriting older than I am. There is a shelf of paint cans, each one with a strip of the actual color brushed onto the lid so nobody has to guess. That shed is a monument to labeling. But the 3rd drawer of that cabinet is blank, and the key to it does not hang on the board with the others. It rides on a separate ring that gets handed from one person to the next in a parking lot, usually in October, usually without much of a speech attached to it. I have carried that key for 11 years. Before me it belonged to a man who retired to Florida and stopped answering his phone. Before him it belonged to a woman who left the service entirely and now sells insurance in Beckley, and who hung up on me the one time I called her. Before her, the trail of custody goes back into the years when this place was still called a national river, before the designation changed and the signs got replaced and the visitor numbers tripled overnight. The drawer is older than the name of the park. Inside there are 41 incident reports that were never entered into the case management system. There are photographs printed on paper that has gone the color of weak tea. There is a plaster cast wrapped in a moving blanket, 17 1/4 inches long, with a pressure ridge across the middle of the sole that no boot and no bear and no practical joker with plywood has ever managed to explain to me. There is a spool of coarse hair sealed inside a freezer bag, and the bag is labeled with a date and nothing else. And there is a single sheet of ruled notebook paper, folded twice, on which somebody wrote 4 short lines in pencil. I have read those 4 lines more times than I have read anything else in my life. I am not going to give them to you yet. You will not understand them yet. I did not understand them for the first 6 years I held that key, and by the time I did understand them, it was because I had watched them come true. I am telling you all of this because I want you to know that what follows is not something I decided to believe. It is something that was handed to me the way you hand somebody a set of keys, and I have been trying to give it back ever since. Let me put you in the place first, because the place is most of it. New River Gorge is a canyon in southern West Virginia that runs for about 53 miles, and the river at the bottom of it is one of the oldest rivers on this continent. That is not a tourism line. The rock down there was already being cut when the mountains above it were still rising. The gorge is 1,000 feet deep in the worst stretches, and the walls are sandstone cliff bands stacked over rubble slopes, stacked over hardwood forest, and the whole thing is choked with rhododendron. If you have never walked through a rhododendron thicket in Appalachia, I want you to understand that it is not a shrub. It is a wall made of green. The branches grow horizontally and twist back on themselves and interlock, and you do not walk through them so much as swim. And inside one of those thickets at midday the light goes the color of pond water, and your visibility drops to about 4 feet in every direction, including up. The local name for those thickets is a laurel hell. Nobody made that name up to be poetic. It is a description. Layered on top of the geography is the human wreckage. This gorge was a coal town for 80 years. There were company towns down in the bottom, Kmore and Nuttleburg and Thurmond and Sewell and a dozen more. And they built rail lines and tipples and coke ovens and haulage inclines, and then the coal ran out and the people left and the forest came back over all of it. So when you are walking a trail in this park, you are not walking through wilderness. You are walking through a ruin that wilderness has grown a skin over. There are brick beehive ovens standing in rows under the trees like something out of a story about a lost city. There are stone foundations with saplings growing out of the middle. There are mine portals sealed with concrete, and mine portals not sealed with anything at all, just a rusted gate and a breath of cold coming out of the hillside at 54 degrees no matter what the season is doing above it. The tourists see beauty. They are correct. It is one of the most beautiful places in the eastern United States, and I have never once gotten tired of the way the fog sits in the bottom of the gorge at dawn and turns the ridgelines into a set of islands. But I also see the other thing. The gorge is a hollow place with a lot of hallways in it, and hollow places with a lot of hallways collect residents. My 11th October began with a woman named Amanda Clark, who was 36 years old, from Columbus, Ohio, and who did absolutely nothing wrong. She came into the Canyon Rim Visitor Center at 4:20 in the afternoon on the 12th. I was covering the desk because we were short-staffed, the way we are always short-staffed in shoulder season, and I remember she stood inside the doors for a while, looking at the relief map, without really looking at it, the way people do when they have come in to say something and have not yet decided whether saying it will make them sound foolish. I know that posture. I have learned to walk toward that posture instead of waiting for it to come to me. She had hiked the Kmore Miners Trail that morning. If you do not know it, the Kmore Miners Trail drops from the rim down to the old mine bench at Kmore Top, and then there is a staircase, 821 steps of steel grate and wood, switchbacking down the cliff line to Kmore Bottom where the processing plant used to sit on the riverbank. Going down is a joke, coming up is a confession. People start that staircase laughing and finish it silent. Amanda Clark had gone down at about 9 in the morning. She had eaten a sandwich on the concrete slab at the bottom, taken pictures of the coke ovens, and started back up around 11:30. She said that somewhere around the 200th step from the bottom, the woods went quiet. I asked her what she meant by quiet, because that word does a lot of work, and most people who use it mean that they stopped noticing sound rather than that sound stopped. She thought about it for a long moment. Then she said that she had been listening to a woodpecker for about 10 minutes, hammering somewhere off to the left and below her, and that it stopped mid-burst, not at the end of a burst, in the middle of one, and that when it stopped, she realized that everything else had already stopped, and she did not know how long it had been that way. That detail is the reason I did not send her on her way with a smile. You can find 100 videos of people telling you that the woods went silent. What you cannot fake, because you do not know to fake it, is the specific and correct observation that the smaller sounds go first and you only notice when the loud one drops out. Songbirds go before woodpeckers. Squirrels go before songbirds. Insects go before everything. By the time a human being registers silence, the silence has been building for 2 or 3 minutes, and something has been walking toward that human being for 2 or 3 minutes. Amanda Clark stood on the staircase in that silence for a while. Then she heard, from the slope below and to her left, in the laurel, a single sound that she described as somebody hitting a fence post with a baseball bat. One strike, hard, wood on wood. She waited. Nothing followed. She went up the remaining 600 steps at a pace she described as embarrassing, and she did not look back. And she sat in her car in the lot at Kmore Top for 20 minutes before she felt right to drive. And then she said the thing that made me take out a form. She said that when she got to the top of the stairs and stepped onto the flat of the old mine bench, the birds were going again. All of them, immediately, like a room where the music comes back on. I asked her to show me on the map where she had been when the woodpecker stopped. She put her finger on a spot below the third switchback. I wrote the coordinates in the margin of the form. Then I thanked her, and I told her the honest and useful things about black bears, and about how sound behaves strangely in a canyon, and I watched her leave feeling better, and I meant every word of the comfort I gave her, and none of it was what I actually thought. Because I had a stack of 41 reports in a drawer, and 11 of them mentioned a single wood knock with nothing after it, and every single one of those 11 had happened within 1 mile of the Kmore bench, and every single one of them had happened in the last 3 weeks of the year, when the leaves are down and the sight lines open up, and whatever lives in the bottom of this gorge apparently decides that it is time to move. I filled out that form completely, and then I did not enter it into the system. I drove up to the shed on Fayette Station Road, and I unlocked the third drawer, and I filed Amanda Clark under October, and I stood there in the gloom with my hand on the drawer front for longer than I would like to admit. 42 reports. That was Sunday. On Wednesday, James Smith walked out onto the Endless Wall Trail with a rope bag and a rack of climbing gear, and he did not walk back out. James Smith was 34, from Charlottesville, Virginia, and by every measure that matters, he was exactly the kind of person who does not become a problem for me. He was a competent climber with 9 years of experience. He had a partner meeting him the next morning. He had told 3 separate people his plan, which puts him ahead of about 90% of the visitors to this park. He had a headlamp, a filter bottle, an extra layer, and a satellite messenger clipped to the lid of his pack. He had sent a message from that device at 6:51 in the evening on Wednesday the 15th, and the message went to his partner, and it said that he was going to scout the approach to a route below Diamond Point and would be back at the car by full night. That message came with a location fix. That fix was on the Endless Wall Trail, about 200 yards past the Fern Creek crossing, at the top of the cliff line. Nothing was sent after it. The device was never activated again. It has never been recovered. His partner, a man named Michael Williams, who was 45, and who I would come to know better than either of us wanted, arrived at the Fern Creek lot at 6 in the morning on Thursday and found James Smith's vehicle cold, with frost on it, and his phone in the center console. We were on scene by 7:20. I want to describe the first hours of a search honestly, because narration has taught the public a version of it that is mostly wrong. There is no moment of grim resolve. There is a lot of paperwork and radio traffic and standing in a gravel lot in the cold holding a coffee that has gone lukewarm while somebody with a laptop on the hood of a truck builds a probability map out of the last known point and the terrain and the statistics of what lost people actually do. The statistics are the important part. Lost people are not random. A person who becomes disoriented in Appalachian terrain goes downhill, almost always. Gravity is an argument, and eventually everybody loses it. They follow drainages, because drainages are the path of least resistance, and because the human brain believes water leads to people, which in West Virginia is often true and occasionally fatal. Roughly 70% of subjects in mountain terrain are found within 1 1/4 miles of the last known point. Emily Johnson ran the search. She was 38. She coordinated the county rescue squad, and she had been pulling people out of this gorge since she was 22 years old. She had the kind of calm that is not a personality trait but a skill, built the way calluses are built. She set up incident command in the Fern Creek lot, gridded the map, and had teams moving before 9. By noon we had 11 searchers on the ground, 2 dogs, and a helicopter out of Charleston doing passes over the rim. By 4 in the afternoon we had nothing. The dogs were the first thing that went wrong. Not wrong in the sense of failure, wrong in the sense of behavior. We had a good handler working a pair of air-scent shepherds, and both dogs picked up on the trail near the Fern Creek crossing and worked it east, which was consistent with the last known point, which was fine. Then, about 300 yards past the crossing, at the edge of a rhododendron slope that drops off the main trail toward the cliff line, both dogs stopped. They did not lose the scent. Losing scent looks a specific way. A dog that has lost scent casts. It swings its head, it circles, it works outward in loops, it is busy. These dogs stopped and they backed up, both of them, at the same time. And then the younger one put itself behind the handler's legs, and the older one stood facing the laurel, with its tail low and its ears flat, and it made a sound that I have heard from a dog exactly 3 times in my life, and the handler, who had worked that animal for 6 years, called it off and walked it back to the trail and said, out loud, in front of 5 other people, that she was not sending it in there. Emily Johnson did not argue with her. That is one of the reasons Emily Johnson is good at what she does. She noted it on the map, marked the segment as unsearched, and reassigned it to a human team. I was on that human team. We went into the Laurel at 4:30 in the afternoon on the 16th of October, with 3 people spread 8 feet apart, which is as far apart as you can be in that stuff and still hear each other. And we came out of it at 6:15, having covered maybe 180 yards of ground. Here is what we found in that 180 yards. We found a rhododendron trunk, about 4 inches through at the base, that had been broken at chest height. Not cut, not snapped by falling deadwood, because there was no deadwood above it. It had been twisted. The break was a spiral, with the fibers drawn out and separated the way rope separates when you wring it, and the top of the trunk had been folded down and tucked back into the crotch of the tree beside it, and the leaves on it were still green and supple, which meant it had happened within the last few days. We found, 40 feet from that, a second one done the same way. We found a place where the ground cover had been pressed flat over an oval about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, in a spot that was up under the overhang of a rock lip where the rain would not reach, and the pressed area was not disturbed at its edges, which is what makes it strange, because a deer bed has scuffed edges from the animal getting up. This looked like something heavy had lain down carefully and gotten up carefully. And we found the smell. I need you to understand that I have handled bear carcasses. I have crawled into culverts after raccoon dens. I once spent an afternoon of my life removing a deer from under a visitor center porch in August. I know what rot smells like, and I know what wet fur smells like, and I know what a bear box smells like at the end of a busy weekend. This was not that. It came in a band, maybe 15 feet wide, and you walked into it and out of it like walking through a curtain. It was thick and warm, and it had a wet animal underneath it, but the top of it was sharp, almost chemical, close to the smell of a stagnant tank or a cut onion left out overnight, and it sat at the back of my throat and made my eyes water. The man beside me, a young seasonal on his first big search, gagged and did not say anything about it for 2 hours because he was embarrassed. We flagged everything. We photographed everything. We came out and reported it, and Emily Johnson listened to all of it with a completely flat face and wrote it down. And then she asked me one question. She asked whether I had smelled it in the same place on the way back out. I had not. It was gone. In under 2 hours, in still air, in a hollow with no wind, in the bottom of a laurel slope where cold air pools and nothing moves, it was gone. Air does not clear itself in a place like that, which means the smell was not a thing that lingered. It was a thing that had been there, and then had gone somewhere else. That night I sat in my truck in the Fern Creek lot with the engine off and the window down, and I listened to the gorge, and I thought about the 4 lines on that folded sheet of notebook paper in the 3rd drawer, and I understood for the first time that this search was not going to end the way searches end. If you are still with me here, and you intend to hear the rest of it, do me one favor before this goes further. Tap the like button, because it genuinely pushes this account out to the people who need to hear it. Leave me a comment with the name of the last place you walked alone in the woods, and be specific, because I read those, and sometimes I recognize the names. And subscribe, because there are 42 reports in that drawer, and I have only read you 2 of them. Now stay with me, because on the 3rd day we found James Smith's rope bag, and it was the condition of it that ended my ability to pretend. The rope bag was 2/3 of a mile from the last known point, on a bench of flat ground below the cliff line, in a place that no reasonable route would have taken him. It was upright. That is the first thing I want to say about it. It had not been dropped, and it had not tumbled. It was standing on its base, on a patch of moss, positioned in the open where the sun would fall on it in the middle of the day, and it had been closed. The drawstring was pulled, and the buckle was clipped. Inside it, coiled, was 70 meters of rope with no damage of any kind. Around it, in a rough half-circle no more than 9 feet across, somebody had set out 4 objects. A flat river cobble, gray, about the size of a dinner plate, which had come from the water 800 vertical feet below. A section of rusted rail spike from the old Kmore haulage line. A whole and undamaged box turtle shell, empty and clean. And James Smith's left boot, laces intact, tied. Nothing was chewed, nothing was torn, nothing was scattered. And every one of those 4 objects had been placed with the flat side down, and the long axis pointing at the rope bag in the middle. Michael Williams found it. He had refused to leave the search, and Emily Johnson had let him stay on the condition that he worked a segment with 2 rangers and did what he was told. He stood over that arrangement for a long time without touching it, and then he sat down on the ground about 10 feet away, and he stayed there sitting until we finished the photographs. He was not crying. He was doing something worse, which is that he was looking at the pattern and understanding it. We recovered the boot as evidence. We left everything else in place and photographed the arrangement from 4 angles with a scale card. And I want to tell you that I have looked at those photographs on and off for the last several years, and I have never once been able to convince myself that a human being did that as a joke. A joke has an audience. A joke gets checked on. Nobody went back to that bench. We had it under observation for 11 days because of the case, and in 11 days not one person approached it. And at the end of the 11 days the objects were exactly as we had left them, except that the turtle shell had been moved about 8 inches to the left and turned over. That evening, I drove up to Nuttleburg to talk to William Rodriguez. William Rodriguez was 63 years old. He had worked maintenance for the park for 26 of those years, and before that he had worked for the state, and before that he had grown up in Ansted, 3 miles from the rim, in a house that his grandfather had built with company scrip and stubbornness. He knew every road in the gorge, including the ones that are not roads anymore. He was the person you called when a culvert failed at 2 in the morning. And he was also the person who taught me that in Appalachia the difference between a story and a warning is entirely a matter of who is telling it and how tired they look. I found him at the Nuttleburg site, cleaning trash out of the fire ring at the parking area. Nuttleburg, if you have never been, is one of the most extraordinary places in this park. It is a coal town that mostly is not there anymore, at the bottom of a road so steep and narrow that the park limits vehicle size to get down it, and what remains is a tipple and a conveyor system that runs 800 feet straight up the mountainside, and 40-odd coke ovens standing in a row along the old rail bed, brick beehives with their mouths open, half swallowed by the hillside. I told him about the arrangement on the bench, all of it, including the boot. He kept picking up trash while I talked. When I finished, he stood up straight and looked down the row of coke ovens for a while, and then he asked me whether the objects had been pointing at the bag or away from it. I said pointing at it. He said, "Then it is a gift, and it is a return, and both of those are worse than a threat." I asked him what he meant, and he sat down on the low wall by the ovens and told me the thing that I have since heard, in pieces, from perhaps a dozen old families in Fayette and Raleigh counties, and never once from anybody under 50. He said that when the mines were running, the men who worked the deep sections at Kmore and Nuttleburg and Sewell had a practice that was never written down and never talked about above ground. He said that at the end of a shift, a man would leave something on the flat rock at the mouth of the haulage, or on the sill of the last coke oven in the row, at the end nearest the trees. Not food, usually, a twist of tobacco, a whetstone, a bent nail, something worked by a hand. I asked what it was for. He said his grandfather told him it was for the ones who were in the hill before the hill was opened. He said the rules were simple, and there were only a few. You do not go past the last oven after full night. You do not answer a knock with a knock, because a knock is a question about where you are standing, and you do not answer that question. If you find something arranged, you do not disturb it, and you do not take from it. And if you have already taken from it, you put back more than you took, and you do it before the sun goes down the same day. And you never ever call to it. Not to mock it, and not to test it, and not to prove to your friends that nothing is out there. I asked him whether he believed it. He said belief was not the point, and that his grandfather had not believed in the load limit on a rail bridge either. He had simply not driven a full car across it. Then he said the only thing he ever said to me about it directly, and he said it while looking at the ovens and not at me. He said that in 1959, when he was not yet born, his uncle and 2 other men went down the Keeney's Creek grade with lights to run a trot line. And they came back at 3 in the morning without their lights, and without one of the men. And the man they came back without was found 9 days later on a bench of flat ground 1.5 miles away, sitting upright against a tree with his hands in his lap, dead of nothing that anybody could name, and with his shoes set side by side in front of him, laces tied. He looked at me then. He asked me whether the boot we had recovered had been tied. I told him it had been. He stood up, and he picked up his trash bag, and he said one more thing before he walked to his truck. He said, "Whatever you do next, do not go down there at night and call to it. Every man I ever knew who did that got an answer." I want to be precise about what I felt driving up out of Nuttleburg that evening with the light going orange on the top of the ridge, and the gorge already filling up with shadow underneath me. I did not feel fear. Fear came later, and it was much simpler than this. What I felt was the specific vertigo of watching 2 things fit together that should not have any business fitting, because I had, in a drawer, a report from 1988 describing a pair of hiking boots found set side by side and tied on a rock above Glade Creek, with no owner ever identified. And I had another from 2004, a fisherman on the Fayette Station stretch who reported that his tackle box had been moved 40 feet from where he left it and set upright on a rock, closed, with a river cobble laid on top of it. I had been carrying that drawer for 11 years thinking of it as a collection of strange stories. It was not a collection of stories. It was a record of a behavior. And behavior means an animal, and an animal means something that is actually out there, doing this over and over, for at least 60 years, in a canyon that 400,000 people visit annually. Jessica Garcia arrived on the 22nd of October, 7 days after James Smith went missing, and she arrived because I asked her to. She was 41, a wildlife researcher contracted through the state, and she had spent the previous 4 years running a black bear density study across 3 counties using camera arrays. She was the least superstitious person I have ever met. She once described a bear that had learned to open a bear-proof canister as, and I am quoting her, a machine with a bad instruction set. She had no patience for mystery and enormous patience for data, and that is exactly why I wanted her. I did not tell her what I thought. I told her that we had an unresolved missing person, evidence of unusual animal activity in a defined area, and that I wanted eyes on that area continuously. That was all true. She deployed 14 cameras over 2 days. She placed them the way somebody who actually knows what she is doing places cameras, which is to say not aimed at the interesting spot, but aimed at the corridors that lead to it, game trails, drainage crossings, the old rail grade, the gap in the cliff line where anything moving between the rim and the river has to funnel through, because a 1,000-foot sandstone wall does not have many doors in it. She set them for 30-second video with a still burst-on trigger, and she pulled cards every 4 days. The first pull gave us bears. 9 separate visits, 4 distinct animals. It gave us coyote, bobcat, a great deal of deer, one very confused turkey, and a raccoon that spent 11 minutes investigating a camera housing and made Jessica Garcia laugh out loud in the office. The second pull gave us more of the same. The third pull, on the 8th of November, gave us 11 frames. Camera 9 was set on the old Kmore haulage grade, about 40 yards up from the last coke oven in the row, aimed down the length of the grade so that anything walking it would be moving toward the lens. Trigger time on the sequence was 3:41 in the morning. There is no video. The video file exists and it is 30 seconds of empty grade. The stills came first, in the burst, and the stills are what we have. Frames 1 through 3 are empty grade. Frame 4 has something at the extreme right edge, entering. What is visible is a vertical column of what I will call mass, from about knee height to above the top of the frame, in motion, blurred. There is no scale reference in frame 4. Frames 5 through 9 are the sequence. In frame 5, the subject is fully in frame, and it is bipedal, and it is walking, not running, walking, with the trailing arm swung well behind the body in a way that human beings do not do because our shoulder does not permit that range of motion without effort. The head is turned away from the camera, to the subject's left, looking down the slope. In frame 6, the head has begun to come around. In frame 7, the head is around and the eyes have caught the infrared. 2 returns, level, and the spacing between them, measured against the fixed reference of the coke oven brickwork in the background of the frame, gives an interpupillary distance that Jessica Garcia measured 4 separate times and then had somebody else measure independently. It came out between 9 and 10 inches. Mine is 2.5. In frame 8, the subject has stopped. Both feet are on the ground. The shoulders are square to the lens. Using the same brickwork for scale, using the known course height of those ovens, which is documented in the Historic Structures Survey to the 1/8 of an inch, the top of the head is between 7 feet 4 and 7 feet 8 above the grade surface. The shoulders are extraordinarily wide relative to the height, and there is no neck visible. The head sits on the shoulders with what is called a low neck profile, which is a thing you see in gorillas and do not see in human beings and cannot fake in a costume without making the wearer blind. Frame 9 is empty grade. Frames 10 and 11 are empty grade. Between frame 8 and frame 9, according to the file metadata, 1 1/10 seconds elapsed. In that time, the subject left the field of view of a lens that covered a lateral distance of just under 30 feet at that range. Jessica Garcia did not say anything for a long time. Then she asked me for the field of view specification for that camera model, and then she asked for a calculator, and then she got up and walked to the window and stood there with her back to me. I asked her what she had. She said that she did not have anything, because she was not going to publish an acceleration figure derived from 2 frames and a bracket mount that might have shifted. Then she said that if the mount did not shift, the number was not survivable. I asked her what she meant by that, and she said that she meant the number was not survivable for her career. That is where things could have ended, and I have thought many times about the version of my life in which it did. Jessica Garcia takes her cards and goes home. I put 11 printed frames in the 3rd drawer, on top of Amanda Clark. Somebody else gets the key in 11 years. Instead, Robert Wilson found out. Robert Wilson was 47, and he was 2 levels above me in the organization, and he was not a villain, and I want to be fair to him because it is easy to make a supervisor into a villain in a story like this. He had a park with a missing man in it, $100 million of annual visitor spending in 3 surrounding counties, and a designation that was 4 years old and still had people watching to see whether it had been a good idea. He had a job that consisted almost entirely of preventing categories of disaster. He called me into the office at Glen Jean on the 10th of November, and he had the 11 frames printed on his desk, and he asked me one question, which was whether I had shared them with anybody outside the Park Service. I told him no. He said good. And then he sat back. And then he said something that I did not expect and that changed how I think about all of this. He said, "This is the 4th time." I asked what he meant. He said that there was a file, and that it was not in the case system, and that he had inherited access to it when he took the position. and that there were similar images from 1993 and 2008 and 2019, and that all 4 sets had been taken within 2 miles of the same point on the map. I asked him where the file was. He said that was not the useful question. He said the useful question was what any of us were supposed to do about it. And then he laid it out. And he was not wrong, and that is the part that has never stopped bothering me. He said, "Suppose we release this. What is the outcome? The outcome is not funding. The outcome is not study. The outcome is 9,000 people with rifles and thermal optics in a canyon with a 1,000-foot cliff line and one road in and out at Fayette Station. The outcome is a search and rescue load that this county cannot carry. The outcome is that somebody shoots a black bear at night at 400 yards and the round carries into a campsite." He said, "And if it is real, and if it has managed to stay out of sight in a park with 400,000 annual visitors for 60 years, then it is better at hiding than we are at looking, and the only thing we accomplish by announcing it is that we corner it." Then he said the sentence that I have never been able to get rid of. He said, "We do not have a policy for this because there is no policy that survives contact with it." I asked him what he wanted me to do. He said he wanted me to close the search on James Smith, keep the cameras running, tell nobody, and stay out of the bottom of the gorge after dark. I agreed to 3 of those 4. I want to be honest about why I went down there, because the honest reason is not a good one. It was not for James Smith. James Smith was 7 weeks gone by then, and everybody involved understood what that meant, including Michael Williams, who had gone home to Charlottesville, and who called me every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock without fail, and who never once asked me a question I could not answer, which was its own kind of pressure. It was not for the record. The record was in a drawer, and would stay in a drawer. I went because I had spent 11 years being the person who files the strange thing, and I was tired of being that person. And there is a particular kind of arrogance that grows in a man who has been careful for a long time. It tells him that his carefulness is a skill rather than a condition of the terrain. It tells him that he is the exception. On the 4th of December, I told Ashley Martinez that I was doing a night check on the camera array at Kmore and that I would be on the air every 30 minutes. Ashley Martinez was 47, and she had been on dispatch for 19 years, and she was the actual load-bearing structure of that entire park. She knew where everybody was at all times. She could tell from 3 words on the radio whether you were fine or whether you were saying you were fine. When I told her my plan, she was quiet for a beat too long, and then she said, 30 minutes, and if you miss one I am calling it in, and I said understood. I went down the Kmore Miners Trail at 7:15 in the evening, with the temperature at 31 degrees and the moon 3 days past new, which is to say functionally absent. Here is what the bottom of that gorge is like on a December night. The leaves are down, so you can see farther than you can in summer, which sounds like a comfort and is not, because everything you can see is gray and vertical and identical. The river is loud enough at the bottom that it eats the middle range of your hearing, so you lose the ability to judge distance by sound, which is the single most important navigational sense a person has at night in the woods. Your headlamp gives you a cone about 60 feet long, and outside that cone the world is not black, it is worse than black. It is a kind of textured gloom in which shapes suggest themselves constantly. I came down the 821 steps and turned east on the old rail grade toward the row of coke ovens. There are 40-odd of them at Kmore. Brick beehives set into the hillside with their arched mouths facing the grade. In daylight they are a photograph. At night, with a headlamp, they are 40 openings that your light cannot fill. And as you walk past them, each one takes your beam and gives nothing back, and your brain, which is a very old machine, tells you every single time that you should not turn your back on that one. I serviced camera 9 at 8:40. Card swap, battery check, housing check. The mount had not shifted. I checked, because Jessica Garcia had asked me to, and because if the mount had shifted I could have gone home believing something comfortable. It had not shifted. I called Ashley Martinez at 9 o'clock and told her camera 9 was serviced and I was moving to camera 11, which was down the grade past the end of the oven row, at the drainage crossing, past the last oven. I knew what William Rodriguez had said. I had it in my head the entire time. and I walked past the last oven anyway, at 11 minutes past 9 at night. And I want you to understand that I did it while thinking about how I was going to describe having done it. Camera 11 was 140 yards further on. I made it about 60. The first thing was the sound going out. The river was still there. The river is always there. But there is a layer of small sound in a winter woods that people do not know they are hearing, the tick and settle of a forest handling cold. And that layer stopped, and I noticed it stopping because I had spent 2 months listening for exactly that. I stopped walking. The second thing was the smell. And it arrived the way I have already described, like a curtain, except this time it was not 15 feet wide. I turned my head to the left, and it was there. I turned my head to the right, and it was there. I was standing in the middle of it. The third thing was a rock. It came out of the slope above me and to my right, and it hit the grade about 12 feet behind me, and it was not a small rock. It was a rock that made a sound like a hammer on a barrel. I have been told 100 times by people who want a simple answer that rocks fall in a gorge, and that is true, and I have also spent 11 years listening to rocks fall in this gorge, and rocks that fall arrive with a sequence of contacts on the way down. This one arrived once. I turned my light up the slope, and the light showed me rhododendron. And then, from up there, past the edge of my light, at a distance I would put at 40 feet, and an elevation I would put at 15 feet above me, something took a breath. I need you to sit with the specific horror of that, because it is not the horror people expect. It was not a growl. It was not a scream. Those things I could have handled, because those things are performance, and performance is an animal telling you it does not want to fight. This was an inhalation, deep and unhurried and enormous, with a volume behind it that I could hear the size of, the way you can hear the size of a room. And it was followed by a slow exhale through what were unmistakably nostrils. It was smelling me. It was taking its time about it. And it was not concerned that I could hear it doing so. I have thought about the physiology of that a great deal since. To hear a breath at 40 feet over the sound of the New River in December, the lung volume involved is not in the range of any animal I have ever handled. I did the only thing I am proud of from that entire night. I did not run, and I did not shout, and I did not raise my light again. I turned my body slowly to face down grade, and I walked. Not fast, walking. Because in 11 years of teaching people about black bears, I have said the same sentence perhaps 2,000 times, which is that running converts you from a person into a thing that is fleeing, and every predator on this continent has a switch that flips when something flees. I walked past the last oven, and past all 40 of the others, and every step of that walk something moved along the slope above me and kept pace. I could hear it in the leaf litter. Not stealthy. That is the part one cannot get people to understand. It was not sneaking. It made a noise like a man walking through leaves, except that the interval between steps was wrong, too long, and when I altered my pace, deliberately, to test it, 3 separate times, the interval above me altered too, within a step. At the base of the staircase it stopped. I know exactly where, because I know exactly where I stopped hearing it, and that is the corner of the old processing plant slab, which is about 200 feet from the bottom step. I went up 821 steps without turning around. Somewhere around step 400 my radio went off, and it was Ashley Martinez at 9:30 asking for my check-in, and I keyed the microphone and I could not make words come out for about 4 seconds. She did not ask me what was wrong. She said, "Copy, you are on the stairs. Keep coming. I am staying on this channel until you are in your vehicle." And she did. 19 years on dispatch. She stayed on that channel and talked to me about absolutely nothing for the entire climb. When I got to the top, I sat in my truck with the doors locked and the engine running for a very long time. And when I finally looked at my hands on the wheel, I understood something that has not left me since. It let me leave. At any point in those 200 yards, at any point in that hour, at a size I have now measured against brickwork and a speed I have now measured against a shutter, it could have done anything it wanted. It followed me out. It paced me to the edge of its ground, and it stopped at a boundary that it evidently knows better than I know it. I was not hunted that night. I was escorted. The card I pulled from camera 9 that night is the reason I am telling you any of this. I did not look at it until the following afternoon, in the office at Glen Jean, with Jessica Garcia sitting beside me, because I did not trust myself to look at it alone. It contained 406 triggers over 18 days. Bears, deer, one bobcat, the usual. And at 3:52 in the morning on the 2nd of December, 2 days before I walked down there, it recorded 22 seconds of video. The video shows the grade, empty, in infrared. Then something enters from the left at the bottom of the frame, very close to the lens, so close that at first you cannot tell what you are looking at. It is a hand. It comes into frame palm down, fingers spread, and it settles onto the ground in front of the camera the way a person's hand settles when they are lowering themselves to crouch. The fingers are long and thick, and there is hair on the back of the hand, sparse and coarse, and the nails are broad and dark and flat. It is in frame for 9 seconds. For 6 of those seconds it does nothing at all. Then the index finger extends and drags through the leaf litter, slowly, twice, in a straight line, and then the hand lifts and is gone, and the remaining 13 seconds are empty grade. And in the last frame of that video, the leaf litter in front of the camera has been cleared into 2 parallel grooves, and lying in the space between them, placed there in the 6 seconds when the hand was doing nothing, is a small object. I drove down and recovered it at first light with Jessica Garcia, who came because she said she was not letting me go alone, and Michael Williams, who I called because he had a right and because I was not going to make that decision for him. It was a satellite messenger. The case was intact. The lanyard was intact. The screen was cracked in one corner, and the battery was dead, and there was mud in the seams and a quantity of hair caught in the clip. The serial number matched the unit registered to James Smith. We never found him. I want to be very clear about that, because I know what a listener wants at the end of a story like this, and I am not able to give it to you. There was no body. There has never been a body. The case remains open in a filing cabinet that is not the one I have the key to, and every year on the 15th of October I take the day off. Michael Williams stopped calling on Sundays about a year later. He sent me a letter instead, once, a real one on paper, and in it he said that he had come to a place with the whole thing, and that the place he had come to was this. He said that James Smith went into that laurel because he was curious, and that being curious was the best thing about him, and that whatever was in there had kept the thing James Smith carried and had eventually decided to hand it back. He said, "I do not think it was sorry. I think it was returning something that was not its." Jessica Garcia left the state contract 19 months later and took a position out west. She has never published anything. We speak twice a year. Once, on the phone, she told me that the thing she cannot get past is not the height, and not the eyes, and not the acceleration figure she refuses to say out loud. It is the 6 seconds. Because 6 seconds of a hand doing nothing in front of a lens is not an animal investigating a strange object. 6 seconds is a decision being made. Robert Wilson retired. Before he left, he came and found me in the parking lot at Glen Jean and gave me a manila envelope and did not explain it. And inside it were the 3 earlier sets, from 1993 and 2008 and 2019, and they are now in the 3rd drawer with everything else, and the drawer does not close as easily as it used to. William Rodriguez died 3 years ago. He was 70 on a Tuesday and gone by Thursday, and the whole county came. I went to the house afterward, and his daughter gave me a shoebox and said her father had been specific that I was to have it, and inside the shoebox were 40 or 50 small objects. Bent nails, a whetstone, a brass button, a pocket knife with a broken blade. Things worked by a hand. I understood what they were for. So here is what I do now. And here is where I finally give you the 4 lines from that folded piece of notebook paper in the 3rd drawer. Because you have earned them, and because they will make sense to you now, in a way they would not have at the start. They read as follows. Do not go past the last oven after full night. Do not answer a knock. If you find it arranged, leave it arranged. Put back more than you took. That is the entire document. 4 lines in pencil, written by somebody whose name I do not know, filed in a drawer that has been handed from person to person in a parking lot in October, for longer than anybody can account for. Once a season, at the end of a shift when there is nobody around, I walk down to the row of ovens at Kmore in the last hour of daylight, and I set something on the sill of the last one, at the end nearest the trees, a carved wooden peg, a pencil stub, a key that no longer opens anything, something worked by a hand. It is always gone the next time. I do not know what that means. I know what I want it to mean. And every year at the start of October, when the leaves begin to go and the sight lines open up and the visitor numbers drop and the gorge starts to feel like it is exhaling, I stand at the overlook at Diamond Point, and I look down at 800 feet of gray forest and 40,000 acres of country that has never once been fully walked by anybody. And I think about the fact that 400,000 people come here every year, and that not one of them has any idea. You may be one of them next summer. You may stand at the Canyon Rim Visitor Center and look at the bridge and take the photograph that everybody takes. If you do, and if you go down into the bottom, I am asking you for 3 things. Stay on the trail, come out before full night, and if you find 4 objects laid in a half circle pointing inward at something in the middle of them, do not touch a single one, and walk back the way you came, and do not run, because it is not asking you for anything. It is showing you that it knows how to give things back. If this account meant something to you, leave a comment below and tell me what you would have done at the last oven, because I still do not know whether I got it right. Give this a like so it reaches somebody who is planning a trip, and subscribe, because there are 45 reports in that drawer now, and the next one is from a fire tower in Pennsylvania, and it is worse than this one. I will be